right, it looks like we are at time, so thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Chinachun, and I'm with NACBA and the Consultants Training Institute. Before we get started with today's Around the Valuation World, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, there's our disclaimer. If you have to obtain CP credit for today's webinar, please answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen that appear throughout the broadcast today. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature for any questions for the presenter. If you have any questions, technical questions, or questions about NACBA, please use the chat feature, as those will be directed to me. Today we have Mel Abraham and Alina Rivera, who are our technical editors for the show today, and joined with Janae Castell. We have Michael Gregory and Cheryl Hyder, who are also with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Mel and Alina, who will get us started.
Thank you, Chinda. Welcome to this program for February. Our program for February. We've got a good one for you. You can see the agenda up on the screen right now. Michael Gregory is going to start off talking about core body of knowledge and industry intelligence. Always a ton of information there. And then we're going to talk about experts' insights, the supply chain disputes, how they affect our valuations, and an always favorite with our judges. Janae Castell is going to be interviewing the judges. And then Janae and Cheryl will talk about trial versus mediation. And we will finish up with Randy Kessler talking about trends in family law. So let's get started with our first session, which is with Michael Gregory. Michael Gregory is a specialist in negotiation and mediation. He has been in the valuation arena for decades, has written multiple books, and is one of the favorites of our program. Comes in every month to support and serve you. Welcome aboard, Michael. It's so good to have you again.
Well, very good. Can you see my screen right now?
We can.
Do you see just one slide?
No, well, you're not in presentation mode.
Okay, thank you. And I'll display settings.
Now you're good.
Swap that. Now we're good?
Now you're good.
All right, thank you.
No, swap it.
Swap it again. Now you're good?
Bingo.
Very good. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mel. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm going to go through one of our normal sessions here for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to go through some detail about last year with a quick summary. And I have a lot of information to share with what we covered last year. But for today, getting started and moving to the slide, I'm going to start off with core body of knowledge. And here are some things I'm going to talk about. Restaurants and inflation. What's the breaking point in terms of inflation? And a study that was done relative to this. And you'll want to really pay attention if you work with restaurants, and this study as a reference for you. And then takeaways from the final big BV event of 2022. Some information about the IRS and their hiring business valuers. I'm going to share some information about that. And then private company EBITDA multiples are rebounded significantly during the third quarter of 2022. We'll have to see what happens here in 2023. And then DeModern, every year he updates his expectations for what's going to happen in the future here, looking at 2023. And for those of you who are looking at projections into the future, great website if you're not familiar, and I'll just go over some of the things that he has there for us. And then valuation impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is just a quick commentary from a source. There's a lot more to this. I'll be talking about that in a 2-hour session with Valuation Products and Services later on next month. In terms of objectives and main takeaways, identify the key developments in the restaurant industry. Select key takeaways from the NACVA VB conference. And I'm just going to share some sound bites with you. But you might want, if you weren't there, or if you were there and you didn't get to these, you might want to check these out at a later time. Apply for a BV position with the IRS if you're interested. Evaluate the implications of the private company EBITDA multiples. And I'm suggesting you choose the DeModern website. It's got key information for looking forward indicators. And then reference the Inflation Reduction Act on business valuation. So for restaurants and inflation, the question is, what's the breaking point? At what point will a restaurant not be able to pass on its costs and still maintain its clientele? Well, this study looked at food and labor costs, and they're up, and you know that. Full service is up about 9%. Limited service is up 7.2%. according to Restaurant Business August 2022. The revenue management systems, when the prices are increased 10 to 13%, that's a severe decline in traffic. So restaurateurs looked at this and they found out when you increase less than 10%, your traffic will eat a lot of, no pun intended, will eat a lot of that. And you'll have to eat a lot of it and your customers will be okay. But once you get to the 10 to 13%, then it drops off. And any more than 13%, those businesses saw such a significant decline, they were being forced to close. So looked at 25,000 locations to look at what this breaking point might be. And they also found out 45% of consumers are eating out less, they're spending less, and they're ordering less expensive items. All those are elements that are going to impact your revenue stream as you're making projections in restaurants too. Now from the BV conference with ASA, there's a host of things, and these are just a smattering of some of the things that I thought in particular you'd want to know about. Understanding the psychology of fraud, and I have a reference to the study about how people do little things at first and get away with it. They keep thinking they can do more, and that's how folks get themselves in really big trouble. And the expected inflation rate's about 3%, with expecting a mild downturn in the economy. I read something in the Wall Street Journal late last week, and now economists tend to be thinking maybe a slight downturn in the second and third quarters of this year. That's not from this finding at this BV conference with NACFA, but that's just an update. Financial metrics are looking strong, but what about cultural issues, and what about our employees happy? If you have mergers of your firm with someone else, what does that mean? How do your two cultures mix? I'm involved with, as mediator, sometimes within businesses, and I get involved with the cultural differences that happen with one firm I'm working with. The average age of their technical people is around 50. In the other firm, there's nobody over age 30. You think there's a possibility of a culture difference there? And the answer is yes. Long-term growth should reflect organic growth, not just acquisitions. So that's as you're taking a look at growth of your companies, is it because of acquisitions or are they actually growing organically? And then frequent ethics complaints involve litigation and personal attacks. So keep that in mind in terms of people who are filing ethic complaints, maybe against you or you're filing against someone else. Those are the two primary areas. As a sanity check on spreadsheets, I actually interviewed T-Bay before the session when he presented it, Gar T-Bay, and I also attended his session and I looked at his spreadsheets, and I looked at those both from the standpoint of he's got a generic one and one with an example in it. And he said, anybody that wants to get his spreadsheets, this is what he's been using over time. He's now in a position, he's getting closer to the end of his career. And he said, well, we learn, we earn, and we return. And in terms of return, he's returning back to the industry and saying, these are the lessons I've learned, and I can use this to critique my own work, and I can use this to critique somebody else's work to say, did you do the right sanity checks to see if your value makes sense? So you might want to check him out. He said anybody could email. Judge says great valuation report is where you can follow all the logic, either by following the narrative or the charts and figures. That doesn't mean you, that means the judge can. That means a third party can. That means somebody who knows nothing about valuation can. And does your report read that way? And the McKay 66 customer profile says, you own your clients. And how do you differentiate yourself? And they offer some marketing techniques of how you can differentiate yourself. Keep that in mind if you're a startup in particular. Artificial intelligence is starting with BV selecting market comps as an example. So there's a lot going on right now with artificial intelligence. You've seen this with writing reports and other things, but this particular study takes a look at customer profiles and your own. Artificial intelligence and comparables. Now, young BV people, they need more client interaction experience and they want more credibility. So what are you doing to enhance their skill set? They may come on very strong with technical skills, but they also realize this too. They don't have the experience and they want more help in what area? On what have historically been called the soft skills are now being called the critical skills. I teach with CPA societies and state planning councils and bar associations on collaboration. And a lot of that has to do with how we collaborate well with others. Now, relative to the IRS is looking for 14 new business valuers. Actually, they're looking for about 200, but 14 that all they do is business valuation. That's all they do. They're called financial analysts. And that's the salary, 94 grand to 151 grand. And that's the kind of work they do. I was one of these in my career, early in my career. Later in my career, I was a frontline manager in this area. Later in my career, I was a territory manager, and I headed up business valuation nationally for the IRS. It's a very family-friendly place. You're on probation for your first year, then you have 4 days a week when you're remote, 1 day a week you come in the office. It offers great work-life balance. You work 40 hours a week. You can earn credit hours after that. Most people do. You can earn up to 24 credit hours. You can take them whenever you want. You also have 4 hours per pay period. That's every 2 weeks of annual leave, 4 hours per pay period of sick leave. People just accumulate those. And the sick leave you accumulate adds on to your retirement time with the IRS. So if you have any interest in this and learning more, reach out to Gary A. Smith 2. That's his email, Gary A. Smith 2 at irs.gov. He can talk to you about what valuers do in the IRS in case you want to apply for something like that. And then in terms of the EBITDA multiples, look on the far right, and you can see that from the second quarter to the third quarter in 2022, it jumped from 2.4 to 3.7. So that's where it was at that time. Things have jumped quite a bit. We'll see what happens as the fourth quarter comes in and as the year progresses. Then finally to Damodaran, and Damodaran posts his data update for 2023. Professor Aswath Damodaran is from New York University, Stern School of Management. He has a great website with all kinds of cool stuff in it. And so there are just some of the things that are there. It's free. It's a great blog post. He posts this based on new data, and his current ARP or ERP for 2023 is 5.94%. And then the valuation impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. New fund beefs up the IRS. Mentioned that earlier. With the IRS getting more money, they're hiring 14 new business valuers. E&G expansion with IRs. The areas that we expect to see more work, 409A, worthless stock, intangible valuations, intercompany transactions, and more. Its most significant impacts are identified for pharma, biotech, and international issues. And there's a great summary by McKinsey, which leads me into additional resources, the ABCs of behavioral forensics. Here's McKay's 66 customer profile, if you want to look at that. Inflation Reduction Act by McKinsey, here's a summary. Here's Damodaran's website with key information. And these are the sources I look at each month. BV Wire, BV Update, the Value Examiner from NACVA, NACVA CTI training summaries, valuation products and services, the IRS, and other sources. And this is my contact information. That's my phone number. That's my email. If you have any questions or concerns, come back to me. And that's the first session here, or the first session I'm involved with. I wasn't here in January. This is the second session for this year in this particular topic. But now I'm going to take you into industry intelligence. Oh, there's a poll there. And I just have to get rid of that myself. Just answer that, please, if you would. And I'm going to take you into industry intelligence, summarizing what took place this past year. So looking at this, you already know who I am. Here's a summary. There were 3 interviews that I was involved with this last year. I'll go over that. There's 70 articles that are highlighted. I'm going to go over about 2 dozen of those. 69 references to links to help you. I'm not going to go over those, but they're all in here. So you can look at those links and see if any of those might be helpful to you. In today's commentary, I'm going to go over the items that are listed here. Again, I'm providing all the links. I'm assuming you have access to NACVA sources, so they're not highlighted here, but they are extremely valuable. So running through 2022, in January, ESOPs were a big issue. One was a landmark case, and the second was the underlying importance of the management interview. The Department of Labor lost in this case. The court said you're not following standards. Since that, the Department of Labor has been settling a lot of cases informally, given the results of what happened on that case. But the court commented as well, relative to the petitioner winning over the DOL, Department of Labor, was that they had excellent interviews, and given those facts, they could overcome what the Department of Labor had been saying. In January, he interviewed a boutique firm with Drew Dorweiler and Crawford Boyce, and they were taking a look at issues associated with supply chain and the trends in supply chain and valuation. Those were the 6 things they focused on. That's its own presentation there in January, if you want to go back and look at that. And I see we're going to have some commentary again today on supply chain, but that's a good source from this firm, and that's what they focus on. Moving into February, update on Stout Restricted Stock Study. The companion guide is available. That's available for free to download. And new case points up valuation perils and buy-sell agreements, meaning for you as a valuer, there's great information out there on to make sure they have good buy-sell agreements, some things you can give to them as sources. Mercer has some great sources here too, and you can be involved in the valuation of those. In March, ownership transition in the middle market, talking about what's going on in that particular market at that time, still is pertaining to what we're doing today. And Hitchner does a primer on 3 transaction bases. He took the 3 major transaction bases, compared them one to another. So if you're involved with these, and let's say you're an expert witness, do you want to know the pros and cons or how they're similar or how they're different? Great source with that was presented back here in March. Then April, a big thank you to Janae on several courses. Janae has substituted for me when I've not been here, and I appreciate that. And in April, we interviewed her. And of all things, on business valuation collaboration, because she's a collaborator. She's doing that today with Cheryl Hyder. And in collaboration, she talked about a number of different things. She said, I've been doing this for 15 years. She's collaborated with different people on different topics, how she's done that, why she's done that, how that's helped her out with her firm. It's expanded her intelligence and experience with what others are doing, and it's made her a better valuer. So great interview with Janae, sharing that with us. And again, I thank her for helping me out in the course of the year. Great person to collaborate with here on Around the Valuation World. In terms of other things, dispelling the hired gun perception of testifying experts. Many of the courts view us as being hired guns. We should be independent. We want to show our independence, but we all know people in the profession that tend to go low when low is better and high when high is better, and may not be doing their job ethically. We need to dispel that by making sure we're doing things right. And that actually helps you with your clientele when you can do that as well. The AICPA bridges the VS 100 IVS gap and going through what the elements are between those 2 different elements. In May, the AICPA offers free webcast on estate and gift valuations. If you're not familiar with the area or you've done minimal work, this was a great introduction to what you need to know for estate and gift tax valuations. For goodwill impairments in the US, they doubled in 2020, according to the Kroll study. We don't know 2021 or 2022, but clearly if they doubled in 2020, that points to that's an area of significance. And also in June, we interviewed Gene Trevino, PhD, ASA, CFA. He focuses on personal injury and commercial damages. You can see what his experience is. You can see some of the organizations he belongs to. Had an excellent interview with him. And what did we talk about? We talked about first his background, and then forecasting growth with the macroeconomic indicators versus historical averages, and pointing out that you probably are in between those 2. And he had 3 methods that were tested for forecasting growth rates: the firm-specific analysis, econometrics, and then the economic trends and historical industry averages, and saying you're probably between those. If you're any higher or lower than those, you better have a good reason why, because typically that's where firms are, and there were good reasons as to why. And you can go back and check out that interview. In June, study says there's clear evidence of bias among BV experts. This is a really important study from the perspective of the judiciary. It says, 1, we all have bias. We can't help it. We have things that shaped us with our experience. Our brains are lazy. I know this in working with neuroscientists. And we like to reinforce our biases with what we see. And the same thing is true with us being a business valuer. And they showed a clear bias. If you knew your seller or buyer was looking for a higher or lower value, we tend to want to make our clients happy. So how do you overcome that? And it's going over your report again and seeing if you maybe made decisions on your assumptions that might reflect that. More business owners are deciding to sell. Most are retiring. Well, I know for 10 years we were told, hey, these baby boomers are retiring. It's a great time to be involved with business valuation. Well, something's finally happened. A lot of the older baby boomers are saying, I'm not going to live forever. I'm starting to have some health issues. I thought I'd keep this business going forever. I now need to take serious succession planning into account. And that's what this says. A lot more folks are involved with selling, and most are retiring, not continuing on in business. Bob Morrison from ASA cautions appraisers about automation. That is hitting a button and going ahead and saying, there's my number. And instead, before you hit that button, go back and look at what your assumptions are, and do you need to tweak it based on what's in those algorithms? Hitchner surveys what the cost of equity data sources are of choice, which ones are, who's using what, and how to use them, and what you can do on critiquing that. In August, they interviewed me, Mike Gregory, on mediation. We're having a discussion today on mediation versus trial. I'm a mediator. I've been a mediator now for over 30 years. I've been a mediator with the Supreme Court in Minnesota since 2004. I do 2 to 4 mediations a month. With that in mind, I brought up, what's it like when you have the experts on both sides, the attorneys on both sides, the decision makers on both sides, and how can we bring them together by facilitating that process? It's confidential. Both sides can listen to each other probably for the first time. Both sides can express things for the first time. And I brought up what are the best practices in this and things to be concerned about. And today, we're going to get a further expansion on that by Janae and Cheryl. So I'm glad they're talking about that here today. We talked about the IRS job aid on reasonable comp. Is it still relevant? And the answer to that was yes. In fact, at the ASA International Conference in September, someone spoke on this topic in particular and said, the IRS job aid and the appendice that comes with that is as relevant today as it was when it was published initially. And if you just go to valuation of assets, IRS, on Google, you can bring up the job aids on reasonable comp, S-corp valuations, and discount for lack of marketability. 2022 market risk premium and risk-free rate indications from Pablo Fernandez. Pablo Fernandez comes out with his market risk premium study based on information he gets from various people, including us as business valuers. And he publishes that every year. And so I'm just sharing with you, I always get a copy of that. I always look at it. It's always interesting to read. And that was a notification of when it had just come out. Delaware court cites studies of appraiser bias. I talked about bias earlier. Well, here now the Delaware court said this one appraiser was biased on what he had done based on assumptions that were used in the development of that model, that a third party being independent would not have made those assumptions. So I'm pointing out the courts are really looking at this now, and you want to make sure you go back and look at your report and can I justify all my assumptions as reasonable. Paper investigates patent valuation methods for those who are involved in valuing intangibles and patents. This is a paper that looked at various approaches and why you might take different approaches with different facts. In October, car dealer blue sky values remain at record levels per the Hague report. Just says this is what's going on in that industry. Nath comments on Hitchner versus DeModern. Now, Eric Nath has written several papers over time. And what we can say now, 30 years later, is some of the things that he talked about with some papers he wrote earlier on have come to pass. And when he wrote his papers, it was kind of, that's just out there. That's just kind of, where is he coming from? And today, we're given some serious contemplation to what Eric Nath had to say on both Hitchner and DeModern as the two were going back and forth with their approaches, and what he had to say on looking towards the future rather than looking at historical information. The AICPA releases a draft of business combination guides. I've been following drafts of the AICPA for over 30 years, and their drafts don't change a whole lot from draft to final. So if you're working in the area of business combinations of acquisitions or mergers, you probably want to download that and see what it says. When the final comes down, you probably want to get that, but it's always very insightful. And then take a fresh look at your long-term growth rate, says Grabowski. Should we have more than one? Should we have two? Should we have three? Looking at these over time. So what should go into the consideration for a long-term growth rate? Real good insight by Roger Grabowski. In December, develop your young BV staffers on interpersonal skills. You heard that earlier. What do young BV staffers want? They want to go out on site. They want to meet the client. They want to enhance their own skills. No question, really good technical skills, really good phone skills, really good networking skills with all these electric systems. What they don't have as much of is the interaction, interpersonal in a BV environment with professionals. And that's one of the things, if you're hiring, you want to make sure you're enhancing skills. You're looking at the development of this person's career, that you're asking them what they want to do. And you're helping them with what, again, had been called the soft skills. Today, we're calling them the critical skills. And those are things that I work with, for example, with collaboration. Appraisers have the highest exclusive rate under Dober, or Dober Challenge, says PwC. That says, as we look at economists, as we look at CPAs, as we look at appraisers, who gets thrown out the most? Appraisers of these different groups. Why is that? Because the court has looked at them and says, maybe this is not your area of expertise, or you haven't worked significantly in this area, or there are other concerns with what you're testifying to here. So that was a good study on saying, here's why the court's making the decisions that they had. Well, having said this, I'm not going to go through all the references. I'm going to tell you that from this slide right here, through a whole host of these slides, I'm not even going to bring them up, through going back one, going through slide 64 are all the references. These are the 69 references that I have used in the course of the year. And I brought up these references because I'm thinking these are things to help you. My goal is to help you with the things that you have an interest in so that you can be a better valuer. Well, there are 2 or 3 slides, depending on the month, for all the months we just ran through, January through December. So what did we go over? We said pre-interviews with key players. I said, here are 24 articles where I highlighted a couple of things where we typically have as few as 4 to as many as 7 things I talk about in a given month, but those were 24 of them. 69 reference links to help you on many of those links come from what I just talked about, but you can go through any given month and look at those links, and I put them in there to help you, and now they're just all summarized for the year. And then I'm coming back to you and saying, I've got folks that I need to think who've been very helpful to me. And one I've already mentioned, and that's Janae Castell. She's on here in just a few minutes. But I take off 1 or 2 months during the year, family vacations and things happen. And when that happens, I know I can count on 2 people to take over this monthly session. And one of them is Janae. So I have a special thanks to Janae for helping me look good. And the other is for James Ewert. And he has done this more recently for me here last month. So a special thanks to both of them, I'll say, for making me look good and for helping maintain our standard with the information that we have to help you out each month. And then each month is just with the last session, I commented, these are all the sources that I look at each month: BV Wire, BV Update, the Value Examiner, NACFA CTI training summaries, valuation products and services, IRS information, and other sources too. And I do this because I love being with this particular team with Around the Valuation World. I like the quality product that we present year after year. And we present this because we're trying to make the profession better. So as I bring this to a conclusion, I'm just coming back and saying, once again, there's my contact information. If you've got any questions or concerns on what I presented today, by all means, come back to me at any time. And with that, I'm going to come back and say thank you very much. And I'm going to pass this back to either Mel or Elena.
Thank you, Mike. It's great always having you with us. So now you have another polling question. Make sure you respond to those before going to the next session. And now we are going to have Brad Sargent and James Spencer with us. They are part of the Sargent Consulting Group. Brad is the founder and managing member of the group, and he's a CPA and ABF, CFF, CETA, CFE. He has lots of certifications, and he assesses clients' challenges and identifies solutions quickly and cost-effectively. Brad loves distilling complicated financial information into compelling, simple stories, and he has been recognized as an expert witness in multiple venues and is a highly sought guest, lecturer, and speaker. And we also have with us Jim. Jim is the director in the group, and he's a CFE, a CBA, CIRA, CCA. He has a master's in business administration. He's an integral in securing many of the firm's largest wins in industries as diverse as automotive, construction, family law, healthcare, logistics, and manufacturing. He uses his strong background in finance to lead business valuations and damage calculations. So Brad, Jean, it's great having you with us today. You can take it from here.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our segment. Really what we're looking to do is just sort of give a brief update on the presentation that we provided last year, both in Salt Lake City and in Park City. And we're talking about the supply chain and all of the issues that we have become so familiar with in the supply chain and how it's impacting us. Jim and I practice in the area of disputes primarily. We also conduct a lot of investigations, but in business valuations and family law matters, as well as economic damage calculation, there just is innumerable impact to trying to forecast and project into the future. There we go. So some of the things that we want to really focus on in the brief window that we have today to spend with you is simple. Obviously, we all know about the $6.25 dozen eggs at our local grocery store, the things that are impacting us personally. Professionally, the areas in the supply chain that we're, how are we able to effectively conduct investigations? How are we able to effectively create a loss, profit, damage model in our professional lives? And one of the things that we really want to focus on that we're seeing in our professional life is the supply chain of talent. And where are the people? I don't know, obviously, this is a little bit of the theater of the mind doing the webinar. We can't get the hand raised, but how many of you are seeing how hard it is to hire good people? Mike was talking in his previous section about the BV analysts, and they want to get out on site and they want more. Well, the expectation level, and we are going to discuss that in some degree. Thanks, Tara, for chiming in. Not only what are young folks coming out of graduate programs now expecting? What are they expecting as far as work, life balance, flexibility? What are they expecting as far as compensation? And what are they expecting as far as actually performing the job? And this is changing and evolving continuously. So it's not something typically, because we do want to focus on disputes, but this is not just for us running our practices, our professional service practices. This is what our clients are facing. And some of the issues that are floating around is we have to assess when we're performing valuations sometimes competitive advantages. So one of the things to ask is, if you're assessing a competitive advantage of a business, is it an advantage if they are mandating that everybody come into the office for 40 hours a week? Or is it a competitive advantage that they are allowing 100% work from home and work flexibility? These are the types of issues that we're trying to get our arms around, trying to figure out. These are rising up in the areas of dispute. So we just want today, in again, this brief window, to stir up some thought and maybe some dialogue. Your questions are certainly welcome while we're talking, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on the chat and answer them as we see them in real time.
Okay, so we're going to talk, we're going to open up a little bit, talking a little bit about the things that have actually impacted the supply chain when it comes to the supply of goods. I'm sure we spoke a few times at the two super conferences back in August and in December, kind of about supply chain disputes. And everything was constantly changing. Even just from August to December, we saw many different things change, many new types of issues within the supply chain. But talking about the speed of change. So, at the beginning of COVID, I think everybody, saw right away the impact COVID was having on the ability to get goods from around the world. One of the very first issues within the supply chain that caused a lot of problems was China was actually the main manufacturer for the world of personal protective equipment. And what ended up happening is in early 2020, China had all this manufacturing, all these masks and gloves and all the different equipment, and they were shipping them out in shipping containers to all, edges of the world. And what ended up happening is you had these astronomical costs to ship goods around the world immediately after, because shipping containers were no longer where they normally would be. They were moving from, they would ship from China out to the western coast of Africa. Well, there's nothing in the western coast of Africa that would warrant them to ship something back to China. So there were many different distributors and shipping transportation companies that had to ship empty containers back to China, which actually ended up increasing, the cost of shipping goods tenfold. Something that would normally cost $100 to ship was now costing close to $1,000. Then the next thing you start hearing about is, okay, now you have the the issue with the chip shortages. New car and used car prices skyrocketed because the average American automobile requires about 1,200 different semiconductor chips. Well, at the same time that there was they're trying to manufacture cars, there was a huge influx in demand for home electronics, whether it be computers or televisions, video game systems and other entertainment systems, treadmills and Pelotons, bikes and things like that. And those all need chips as well. So at the same time, you saw that become a major issue. Then they finally figured out some of that, and we ended up having a lot of U.S. manufacturers onshore the manufacturing of those types of chips. But then they couldn't move them around the country because of a truck driver shortage. People were obviously staying home. There were vaccine mandates that were coming out. There were protests around those. There was the Ambassador Bridge protest right outside of Detroit that caused a major issue for the automobile industry. All of those types of things happened. Then a year ago, as we know, we just celebrated, marked 1 year with the war in Ukraine, which caused a huge issue with the transportation and the manufacturing of grains. We saw gas prices and things like that increase. And then, as Brad mentioned, now we're seeing issues with the cost of eggs go up to over $6 a dozen, when we're typically historically would see something around $2 a dozen. So it's constantly changing. There's a constant need to adapt. And now as we're kind of coming out of COVID, or at least there's a feeling that we're coming out of COVID, we're starting to see more and more disputes because there's no longer this sense of we're all in this together, which is what we had seen early on in the pandemic between different companies, understanding that, hey, yeah, you weren't able to give me the product that I needed in the time frame promised, but obviously COVID caused that, and we're not going to necessarily hold you to your contract. We're going to try to work out a way to make this work. We're getting to a point now where people are starting to feel, or companies are starting to feel, okay, we've had 3 years to figure this out. As we now enter the 4th year of COVID here in the U.S., we're not going to, be as lenient. We're not going to be as understanding as we were previously. And so we're definitely seeing a huge increase in disputes, especially when it comes to breach of contract and pricing disputes, which, there are a lot of pricing disputes right now because there's, there were promises for certain terms when it came to contracts that obviously now, with the way that inflation has impacted things, how all these supply chain issues have impacted the cost of goods and services, a lot of times companies absolutely cannot perform under the terms of the agreements. So it's creating a lot of conflict, a lot of issues.
So if I can interject quickly, we're going to talk briefly on our next slide a little bit about government policy and government intervention, but we are all aware that the government provided really vital help to all of us, both personally and professionally, and to our client base and to our economy, to keep businesses open and rolling, even if people were, to use the term, pencils down for a year or more during the pandemic. But now the government intervention, the $1 trillion bailout packages are no longer available. And we are seeing, as Jim had mentioned, absolutely more filings for breach, for pricing disputes, for warranty claims. And again, that sort of uneasy detente along the supply chain from suppliers to final manufacturers and distributors and retail, OEMs, have now started to really peak up. Another area that we're seeing more activity in the legal realm is the distressed businesses, because candidly, we're aware that government intervention kept some businesses open and in play that were headed towards bankruptcy filings. Now those businesses got a 2-3 year reprieve, and they are heading into severely distressed areas. One of the areas that we'll talk about briefly is just the commercial real estate. Jim and I we're based out of Chicago. We have an office in Denver. We were meeting with attorneys in Denver last week, talking to a head of a real estate group of a large Mountain West, footprint law firm, saying in no uncertain terms that Class B, Class C commercial real estate in the downtown Denver area was just absolutely emptying out, and it's creating a massive panic. It is literally the law of supply and demand, and we know when there's a shortage of a supply, like with the eggs, we see the prices going up. We've seen the gas go up. We've seen the inflation across the spectrum. But now we're seeing sort of the pendulum swinging back to the other area. Most of us business owners and operators, and our client base, business owners and operators, are able to take advantage of some pretty unbelievable real estate deals on where we want to be housed. So that's great as a business owner, but not necessarily great for that real estate business owner. So there are pros and cons to all of the above. And all of these things are the factors that are impacting the supply of goods. We want to focus a little bit on the second point, on the supply of services and the supply of people that are out there and how that's impacting all of us. But the key thing to remember is the speed of change and all of the different, what's the latest in the supply chain? And Jim mentioned them all, trying to look around the bend and get a sense of what's going to be the next big thing that's going to be difficult on our supply chain. What are the next big thing that we're going to be talking about is hyperinflationary, or maybe it is commercial real estate and going in that direction, the thing that's plummeting. It's impossible to say. The predictability is just impossible.
Yeah, so talking a little bit about economic indicators, I'm not going to get too far into this because Mike actually covered some of this in the earlier session, but obviously inflation is still high, but it's trending downward. It's like 6.4%, I think, in January. I don't know if February's out, or February will be out soon. GDP last year was up about 3%, so that is actually a positive indicator as to how the economy for us is moving. And then unemployment is down to 3.4%, which has created it's near an all-time low. So it's created this environment that we're going to discuss a little bit further in the next slide, with a lot of movement of people. There's a huge demand for good talent. So there's a lot of, I won't say poaching, but there are a lot of people out there offering incentives to move, to take the best talent from other organizations. And it's creating a challenge for us as experts when it comes to getting good data. I'm going to jump, I guess I'm jumping a little bit further ahead, but we actually had a matter that we started a couple of years ago. It was actually a pre-COVID supply chain dispute that was filed literally about 2 months before COVID became a thing here in the US. And it got punted because the courts shut down for, quite a while. And didn't really ramp back up until 2 years later. We're talking late 2021. And for us, we had to obviously get good information and come up with a damage calculation and support it properly. Obviously to be able to get through cross-examination. And so we ended up having to find the right people, though, to get good information from. And it was very difficult for us to do that because COVID created an environment where people said, okay, I'm not even going to go back to the workforce, I'm going to retire. And it created an environment where some of the good people were taken by competitors. So we had a very limited number of people at this fairly large organization that had the knowledge that we needed and was able to get us the good data necessary to be able to prove our claims. And so we were able to luckily find 2 or 3 people that could really help us out. But what ended up happening is we filed our report in early 2022. As it got closer to the trial date at the end of 2022, 2 of those 3 people that we used had already cycled out and moved on to a different organization, which made it very difficult then for the attorneys in this matter and for us later to then be able to go to court and say, hey, we got this information from these people. They're no longer there. They're no longer here to be fact witnesses as part of this case. So it created a kind of an issue for us.
Well, and data as well, in accounting groups, in finance groups, trying to get a hold of good data. We're working in a project right now, a major distributor, a major supply chain dispute on serious amounts of inventory that showed up 10 to 12 months late, and a seasonal window was missed that resulted in a significant amount of large lost profit. And our own client trying to gather data right now for what occurred during 2020, 2021, 2022, because their finance department were all work from home. And what we're seeing over and over and over, and I think that we're all going to be encountering this, whether we're in disputes or just doing straight valuation work, is getting our hands on that historical financial data that we rely on so much to project forward and do damage calculations on. Some of that data, when we ask who's got it, it's literally like the old Three Stooges, oh, I thought they had it. I thought they had it. And we are having a hard time finding basic financial information that one would think would be easy to find. But again, the work from home era is absolutely a game changer, not on just getting a hold of legacy knowledge from the personnel, but getting legacy hard data and quantitative information from an organization.
Yeah, it's really important if you're brought in early in a case. We often will get, calls on cases, we'll get engaged early when it comes to damage calculations, and they'll say, hey, is this something that's in your wheelhouse? Is this something you can help us with? And we'll say, yes, absolutely. And they'll just get us signed up, and it'll be 6 months later before we get ramped back up. And now we've been adamant about making sure that they understand, look, get us involved right away. Even if we're not doing a lot of work up front, at least help us tell you exactly what we're going to need and who we're going to need it from, so you can get out there and get it while it's still available, so that we don't wait 6, 9, 12 months, however long it may be, and then that information's gone or much harder to find. So one of the other things that we're seeing is the workforce itself is being diminished, especially in accounting and finance. From March of 2020 through basically December 31 of 2022, the number of students enrolling in accounting and finance majors in colleges is down over 9%, nearly 10%. And if that trend continues, by the end of 2023, we're going to be at a 50-year low for students studying in those two professions. Now that's going to create and is creating now a really big issue when it comes to the supply chain of talent, because we've seen hundreds of thousands of people cycle out in the last 3 years out of accounting and finance jobs, and only tens of thousands actually cycling in. So it's creating a very, very lopsided workforce. We have a lot of inexperienced people, and not nearly as many as the experienced people that have cycled out in the last few years.
Looking at the high mobility and a high degree of mobility in the workforce, and the incredibly competitive nature of obtaining and hiring really talented folks at all levels, one of the things that we anticipate is starting to see more trade secret litigation going on, because we're just going to see more labor and employment disputes. As Jim had mentioned earlier, really good people are very hard to find, and they're going to get poached. And many of them will be taking with them not only possibly violating non-competes and non-solicits, but also taking really valuable trade secrets and information about the entity and organization which they've left going to the new organization. And that is an area in the labor and employment field, and the labor and employment attorneys that we work with in disputes are starting to see that as well. It's just the reality that we are all experiencing, how hard it is to find really qualified, good people. And my starting compensation rates have literally gone up 50 to 60% over the last few years, which is just kind of, stunning. How do I handle that? Do I make less profit? Do I pass some of that along to my client base in the form of higher hourly wages? Well, of course, my clients are now experiencing inflation in our billing rates, and it's a very tough market and tough environment to be in. And some of them we simply have to educate that our talent is much more expensive. Our raw materials are a lot higher, so our end product costs a little bit more. And that's just the tough reality of the world that we're living in right now. So I think, folks, that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. Again, we can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today. We'd be happy to take a question or two if there's any that are popping up. But Steve, your observation that for accounting and public accounting firms, my footprint of my small shop is Chicago, Detroit in the Eastern time zone, Denver in the Mountain time zone to the west of us. I guest lecture at numerous universities in all three of those markets. So I'm very, very familiar with heads of accounting departments, heads of finance departments, and colleges of business. And I'm telling you that accounting department professors are now concerned about their jobs. Enrollment at major state universities in the states that I occupy and in my geographic footprint, the enrollment is down down far higher than 10% heading into the 2023-2024 school years. And they are looking at making reductions to staff in the forms of tenured professors. And that's going to only increase education costs. So there's just all kinds of dominoes falling out there, and it's real, and we've all got to deal with it. So my best advice to those of you that are looking to hire good people, looking to get good people at an entry-level position, creating those good relationships at the college level. Nowadays, my understanding is that internship has literally been the pathway to the full-time employment. So we're trying to get folks in that junior, senior year as interns and have them with us and groom them for a couple of years and then make it hopefully an easier transition into full-time when they graduate with the 150 hours. Last but not least, for the CPAs among the group, I'm sure you are all aware that the AICPA on a national basis is now considering what many states are mandating, and that is reducing the 150-hour rule down to 120 hours, simply to keep people in the accounting profession, keep kids, young people in accounting as a major in school, because that 150-hour rule in that last year of graduate school is not the cherry on top. It's the icing on the cake. It's extremely expensive. And so that's what's coming next. We may see a reversal of the 150-hour rule where CPAs will no longer have to have that. They'll be down to 120 hours. That's really something to think about.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Jim. Brad, I got a question for you real quick. It's not from someone else. It's from me. Just, are there areas or people that are being successful in recruitment and retention of staff, and what are the key things that they're doing differently that the profession seems to be missing?
No, that's a great question. And I will tell you, my observation is, and it kind of maybe fits with the folks that we recruit at our small boutique, that flexibility right now is really critical. These are young folks coming out, and I'm talking about the entry-level folks. These are folks that are coming out of, even the senior people. We've been working from home. We've been on Zoom. We've gotten used to it. And it does have built-in, baked-in conveniences. So people don't want to suddenly have to be mandated, you've got to be in my office 50 hours a week, Monday through Friday. So I really think that flexibility and that providing the work from home environment and having the right tech and the right tools in place, because I've also seen some businesses far larger than mine, excuse me, that have just been a nightmare as far as implementing work from home because of their tech. They simply aren't giving their folks the right tech to utilize to be able to do that effectively or be out at the client sites effectively. And I have to tell you, compensation is a big issue.
Yeah.
People know, especially in accounting and finance, the professors know, the students know, here's what you know, the big four are paying. Here's what the major consultancies are paying. And that's trickling down to little boutiques like mine. So we business owners and managers have to be willing to step up and offer a very competitive compensation. And then be able to educate our clients, as I've said, as far as increased billing rates.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, and me personally, I've had a handful of friends that moved into accounting a little bit after I moved into what I'm doing. And what they've, you know, when they started being mandated, they needed to come back to the office. They said, no, thank you. I'm going to move on. I'm going to find a firm that either allows me to work from home, or in some cases, I actually have a couple of friends actually moved out of accounting and finance altogether and went into like tech, because that allows them the freedom to pretty much do their job from anywhere in the world. And they pretty much figured out that in COVID, that's a possibility. So, you know, once I think our profession can kind of solve that dilemma of FaceTime, you know, and being able to find ways to have people be able to work remotely, especially at the more entry level, we'll hopefully be able to retain people. But until then, it's still going to be a challenge, and hopefully it's something that we can all solve.
But I would add this too, Mel. It's an exciting time for people in our space, because as experts and consultants, I'm now testifying in venues. I used to be governed by my geographical physical footprint. And because of Zoom, because of all these remote, I've worked major cases and testified in federal courtrooms without ever being in the room with retaining counsel. Worked on cases, you know, for 18 months. And we can take advantage. We have to think just the way the young people are thinking, and we've got to be really flexible and nimble and take full advantage of that.
It's going to be interesting to see how this develops, because I think that there's a delicate balance between development, culture, expertise, and serving the clients. And when we put people at home, can we actually accomplish it, especially at the younger levels, to get them educated up at a level that works with them technically, but also works with them personally to be able to navigate that. So I think it's an interesting time for sure. Times are changing, and they're changing faster than us accountants are used to or like to.
I think the key is, if you're going to mandate FaceTime, you better be prepared to make FaceTime really valuable and really productive for anybody at all levels that are going to be in the office. We bring people together to bond. We travel with folks. We bring them out to the markets. And again, like Mike said, these young people, they want to be out there. They want to get into not only just the charge work, but the business development as well.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you both being here talking about this. And it is something that we need to really navigate and think about. So thank you again to both of you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Seth, for posting that information too. Appreciate that.
All right, on to our next segment, which is one of the most popular segments. There's another poll question quiz up. Make sure that you answer that. Janae Castell is going to be joining us. She has been in the valuation seas for a number of years, focusing on the body of knowledge, separating personal goodwill from company goodwill. She's going to be spending the time talking with our distinguished judges, that it's always full of a wealth of information. And so welcome, Janae, and I'll let you introduce the judges that you're going to be speaking to today. And I look forward to this session.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters thus far. Thank you to our judges, Judge Driscoll, Judge Platt, and Judge Yates. So glad to have you guys on. So we will get right into it. Today, we're talking about evaluating the expert, how the court perceives neutrality, qualifications, and experience of the experts and appointing them. So my first question that I'd like to throw out to you guys is, how do you, or how do judges in general, evaluate neutrality in experts, or how can experts demonstrate neutrality?
I'll take the first swing at it if you don't mind. My experience is that experts fall into three different categories. The first category is experts who always testify for one side or the other. And they're inherently suspect, because if you're making all your money representing plaintiffs or making all your money representing defendants, that's telling. The second group of experts are the people who work roughly equally for both sides. And in commercial litigation, that's more common, where you'll have experts routinely testifying, sometimes for the plaintiffs and sometimes for the defendants. And then the third group of experts are the people who are coming in for just about the first time they've ever testified. And it's fascinating seeing that group, because there's an awful lot of research that gets done about experts and their prior testimony. When somebody shows up for the first time, nobody quite knows what to do about it. There's a tendency to try to challenge them just simply because they've never been qualified as experts before. But I've never felt that was in any way disqualifying, nor do I feel that it undermines their credibility.
Great. I would agree. I think I was, it probably was Kaplan, somebody whenever early on in my career, and he suggested that, you know, we just explain that we're experts in business valuation. We're not making a living out of just testifying and showing up to court. Yep. Our living is based in business valuation or financial matters, and I just happen to be here in court today to help you. So yeah, I don't do this all the time. It's just part of what I might be doing.
That's a really good way to frame it, because I think that jurors in particular are suspicious of people who are, for want of a better term, professional witnesses who really make their living going to court and testifying. And if you can disabuse the jury of the notion that you're such an expert, it really goes a long way toward giving the jurors a great deal of comfort in the fact that you're there to help, not to advocate.
Right. Well, do we have other thoughts on that question about demonstrating neutrality? Any other tidbits?
I just, and thank you, I apologize for joining a little bit late. I just want to start with agreeing with that premise, and that is so important for every expert witness to recognize, and that is that experts have to be neutral. So do not challenge that premise. The minute that you are asked to be an advocate, or sense you're being an advocate, you are not doing that which you are meant to do. Let the lawyers be the advocate. And I'm sure, and I apologize for joining a little late, I'm sure that Judge Yates, who says it so much better than I do, that it's so important for experts to remember that they are teachers first and foremost. They are teachers to the trier of fact, teachers of their methodology, and teachers of how that methodology should be applied. So teachers might have a certain way of looking at the world. We think of all the great teachers we've had, but they've let us think for ourselves along the way and accept whether their conclusions are valid or not. So I think to remember that you are neutral, remember that you are not an advocate is essential as you are trying to demonstrate your neutrality, to remember that you are indeed neutral.
If you don't, I'll add to that simply and try to clarify, Janae. I noticed you changed, or you suggested changing the title of our presentation. And it's one thing to evaluate experts that are there as experts for one party or another, and it's a different process, and it varies from state to state and federal courts in appointing, if the court intends to appoint its own expert. And if the court is going to do that, then the process may be different from state to state, or even jurisdiction within states. But in particular, are you going to allow either party to object to the appointment? You're going to appoint your own expert. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do that, do you give you just name who you're going to do it without any consultation, which is, in my opinion, not a good idea? Or do you provide a process by which you say, counsel, I'm going to appoint my own expert. Can you give me 3 names, 2 names, 5 names, whatever? And do you say, or I'm thinking of the following individuals. Does anyone object to any of them? And any or all of that process can work. And then because then you're not evaluating a witness who's on the stand, and in terms of their neutrality, you're deciding whose opinion you are going to put a premium on, and in effect present to the parties or to the jury, or if there is one, and that's a very different process. Okay,
so I'm assuming that if you were going to suggest some experts, if you're not going the route of, hey, you each give me a few potential experts, and we'll talk about them. If you're going through it and maybe offering some potential expert witnesses, you've seen them testify in court before. And so how do you, if the attorneys aren't familiar with that expert witness, how do you say, well, this is why I think that they would be a good expert. This is how I've seen them be neutral. Or I guess on the converse, any red flags that if they submit a potential expert, you say, I'm not sure that they can really be neutral.
Well, they're going to present you with name if we're talking about appointing a court-appointed, the court's expert as opposed to a party's expert that's being evaluated by the judge and or jury, that they're different processes. But if you're doing that, I'm not sure you want to explain why you're picking or not picking somebody up front, because right away you're indicating, depending on what their background is, bias. But you would say, I'm thinking of the following individuals. Here's some things they have written. The attorneys, depending on the kind of case it is, may have seen them before, and so forth, without getting any indication that you somehow are in agreement with this particular witness, particularly if they've offered opinions before or have an opinion on the issue that's being decided. So again, that's a very different process than evaluating the neutrality or the credentials of an expert who's being presented by somebody other than the court.
And I would add to everything that my colleagues have said that I tend to try to avoid appointing an expert unless the parties' experts are so far apart that I feel like I'm not getting any viable alternative. Ordinarily, I think we would just as soon have each side present an expert who gives a measured view of the dispute. And as long as I feel like I have one of those on each side, I try to avoid imposing the cost of a third expert, whether of my choosing or by their agreement.
I guess, yeah, I'd agree with what Judge Yates just said. My tendency of appointing a court-appointed expert, which in New York, we don't have that authority that the federal rules give under Rule 706 and that many states have. We don't have the authority to spend money on a judicial function absent consent. That's probably the purest way I can summarize it. Nevertheless, I'll ask the parties, well, if you're each going to appoint your own expert, do you want to have just one expert that will have? That being said, you'll still have the ability to cross-examine that expert. So tying into what Judge Platt said, I never want to be in a position where I'm advocating for anything other than moving the litigation forward and doing so in a cost-efficient manner, which is my charge under the first paragraphs of our civil procedure, under the first paragraphs of Rule 1 of the federal rules. So my view is the lawyers can always be lawyers. And tying into what Judge Yates said, the question is whether they are going to be lawyers with respect to their own experts or with respect to one expert who, yes, I am appointing, but that's the limit of whether I am believing the expert or not believing the expert. I'm appointing the expert. You're both paying for the expert, but you still get to be lawyers with respect to that expert. It's simply a cost-saving mechanism. So I want to stress that simply being a court-appointed expert is simply being a court-appointed expert. It's not that you have more believability or more credibility with the court as a result. Maybe you get to say something different when you hang out with your friends at your weekend barbecues that you were just appointed by a judge. Now, if your friends are impressed by that, you need other friends, by the way. But other than that, I don't think there's that much of a material difference. We don't give an imprimatur simply by appointing an expert. It's just a way to move the case forward without the cost of two experts or more.
All right. So with that and the expert maybe being subject to cross-examination, even if they are a court-appointed expert, how can an expert in court-appointed or otherwise, I think it applies either way, how can an expert in areas of subjective judgment best demonstrate neutrality while remaining confident in advocating his or her opinion?
I'll take a shot at that real quick. The answer to me is to answer your question, how can you do that and still be confident, is you can acknowledge that there is another, at least one and maybe more alternative opinions, and you can deal directly and candidly with them and assess them in a way that is persuasive, which means if it's persuasive, you're not addressing it as an advocate, you're looking at the various opinions. We're judges trying to make a decision, and often the decision will hinge on which opinion we accept, and to either ignore the fact that there's another opinion or dismiss it with snarkiness, among other characteristics, is not persuasive.
And if I can just offer some practical advice, I think the best thing you can do is just answer the questions that are asked of you and not expound upon anything and everything you'd like to discuss. I always used to tell witnesses when I was trying cases that you don't have to win the case on your own. I have plenty of witnesses. And so I'm going to ask you questions focused on what I need you to talk about. And please, please, please follow my lead when I ask those questions. I think the experts that the jurors tend to be most turned off by are the ones who seem to have answers to every question and a whole bunch of questions that weren't asked as well.
I could sum it up in just a couple of words: be confident, not cocky.
Yep.
So do you think that from the perspective of an expert witness, that there is much difference in serving, or I guess what highlights some of the differences in serving as a court-appointed expert and versus, your party side? Because both times you should be neutral, both times will be cross-examined. So what are the differences that an expert may face?
I think a key difference is, even though those witnesses that are court-appointed are subject to examination, I think as a practical matter, lawyers are going to treat that witness with kid gloves a little bit more than an expert who's being presented by a party. I don't think they necessarily have to. But oh, well, Your Honor appointed this expert, so I'm going to be, just move with some trepidation. I think that's just a practical matter. Now, that being said, Janae, I would caution, if you are court appointed, don't sit back in your chair and think, all right, I don't have to worry. It's just going to be a couple of jabs and the knockout punch isn't going to come, because that's when it will come. So even though on the one hand, you might not get that knockout punch as much, don't be so confident that it's not going to come.
Is there a difference in how the expert may go about obtaining all the information from the parties?
There's the advantage. The fact that you are interfering with the court-appointed process, that's where you really have an advantage, Janae. And I wish that's such a great question. I wish I had appreciated that. That's really the essence of the advantage of being a court-appointed expert, is that I think it will be somewhat easier to do your job, because ultimately, if you're not given the materials by either side, you come to the court and say, Judge, I didn't get it. And then the judge says, well, why didn't you get it? I'm appointing this counsel to try to save you time and money. So I think that is really the preparation and the process of coming to your conclusions may be somewhat easier, because you have the 800-pound gorilla that is the judge to turn to if you're not getting that what you need. And you should feel free to turn to the judge, because again, not that the judge is going to be an advocate for you, but the judge is just trying to bring the case to resolution in an expeditious and cost-efficient manner. And that's what you're there for. So if you can't do your job, the judge can't do their job.
Yeah, I would just add, from a parochial perspective, the state of Maryland, which recently adopted Daubert finally, after denying it was doing it for years. And finally, they just said, yeah, you're right, that is what we're doing. And now we've done it. But they now have a case where the challenge, since the challenge was not to be, could no longer be Daubert in this particular case, they now have a case where the data and the information is arguably fallacious or in some way inadequate or incorrect or both, can exclude the expert's opinion for relying on it. It hasn't been decided yet. But in light of the adoption now of Daubert, where that debate is no longer helps challenge, they're now looking for other ways to challenge, and that's the one. Now, if you're a court, Maryland does have the authority, as do the feds, to appoint a court-appointed expert. Also, I'll take a plug to this just very briefly. There's some confusion even among the members of the bar that I've found, that when courts appoint a mediator, that's not an expert. And there's a confusion, at least among some lawyers, and certainly probably others, that somehow or other, that when the court appoints a mediator, that means the mediator is an expert. Mediator's function isn't to provide an expert opinion, and it isn't to so that confusion can sometimes lead to all kinds of dumb answers to the questions you're asking.
Okay. Okay.
You can tell that Judge Platt is now retired from the bench because he just used the word dumb, which we don't use it at all. We don't use pejorative expressions about anybody.
Well, I'll go further than that. I have taken the position that there is one mediator who is an expert, and that would be me. I'm not. Judge H and I are certainly free to use superlatives about ourselves. That's for sure. No, but that confusion, all joking, does exist, and some people, play on it.
Yep.
Well, I hope Cheryl and I are going to broach some of those issues actually in our next segment. So if we are in a jurisdiction where the court has the ability to appoint an expert, if it is felt that it's a good cost savings, or there's some advantages to appointing an expert, and we can potentially do our jobs better or more easily, those sound like that sounds like a good thing to kind of move into, a good situation to be in for an expert. So how can experts move into, or maybe advertise, for lack of a better word, their willingness or their interest in providing that service?
So we have in New York, we have a panel when the parties can agree on something. We have a panel that is already pre-existing. So if your jurisdiction has such a panel, get on that panel. And then the question will be how to differentiate yourself among the 30, 40, 50, 60 people who are on the panel. And that's a more complicated question that I think first is based on having the judge who's going to appoint you know who you are. So preferably having seen you in their courtroom beforehand. I can tell you what not to do, and that's don't show up in my courtroom with a bunch of glossy promotional brochures, especially unannounced, and think that I'm going to take a break from my trials or my calendar to sit down and have coffee with you. That I'm not a person to be pitched. I think I would try to avoid that whenever possible.
Okay.
Right. I try to. No, go ahead, Judge Platt.
Go ahead, Chris.
I try my best never to be in a position where I can be accused of steering business to anybody that I like. And as a result of that, if I'm going to appoint an attorney, a court-appointed expert, what I typically will try to do is find somebody with whom I have no social relationship. I have only a professional relationship. And so my assessment of that person is based entirely upon what I've seen them do in action. I had a couple of people in the electronic discovery space, for example, and I went out of my way never ever to socialize with them because I never wanted either them or me to be put in a position where we could say that the relationship that led to the appointment was a social one.
You'll see just how isolating being a judge is. I really want everyone, I say this whenever I can.
Yes.
Any audience should appreciate it is very difficult. I know all your jobs are difficult. Our jobs are difficult also because we really have to shut out so much of the world to do this. So the question about marketing yourself to a judge is almost anathema to us because we try to make ourselves immune to that as much as possible.
I would just add to that, I agree with everything that both Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll said. The only thing I would add to that is do some writing. You want to be known by the judge, but you don't want to be known by the judge the way they're talking about for obvious reasons. But writing for something other than your professional journals, write for judge journals. There are plenty of them. Write for bar journals, write for bar magazines. We don't see a lot of that. We see mostly, I've always said too many judges don't talk to anybody but judges, and lawyers don't talk to anybody but lawyers, and mediators don't talk to anybody but mediators. But the way you talk to us as judges is, and others, because is by writing and speaking in forums that are not internal. Then we'll hear about it or read about it maybe, and we won't need to know you to read about you.
Right.
So don't make too big of a splash, is what I think I heard you say.
Well, if you can make a splash but still sound like you're neutral, that's good.
And if you're going to make a splash in the pool where we're just, sunning ourselves on the outside rather than.
Yeah, if the splash contains controversy, that's a good way not to be further considered.
Well, I think maybe a good topic to end on might be some of those making a splash in the wrong way times or red flags that you see. Any sage pieces of advice as well as good stories that you all have?
What I would say first and foremost, if you're trying not to make a bad splash, is that you want to be perceived as the most knowledgeable person who appears at the trial, but you never want to come off as the smartest person in the room. And one of the things that really bothers me is where somebody comes across as really slick, they'll try to curry favor with the jurors and all of that. I mean, you're there to provide information, not to make friends. That doesn't mean you want to come across as mean or distant, but the people who are just a little bit too slippery really don't strike anyone well at all. And I talk to lots and lots of jurors after trials.
I would say, don't forget you're a human being also. So you heard me just with that interchange with Janae, when Janae used the metaphor about the pool. I'm an old-fashioned trial lawyer, so I'm always looking for a metaphor and looking to steal your metaphor. So still be a human being. I had an expert witness in front of me once, and on his CV was that he was a Six Sigma black belt. And I looked at him, I said, should I be afraid? And he just looked straight ahead, and there was no humor. I didn't know what I was saying. I don't know what a Six Sigma black belt is. And the lawyer finally caught on and said, would you explain to the court what a Six Sigma black belt is? And I realized I didn't have to be afraid. It was some management principles. But don't forget, we're all human beings. And what is being on trial? Telling the stories around the campfire. So don't be afraid to tell stories around the campfire.
On building on what Judge Driscoll just said, I think it's safe to say, or fair to say, that particularly with juries, but even judges, if you are the world's foremost scholar in whatever field you're presenting your expertise in, but the fact finder, jury or judge or both, dislikes you and thinks that your part of your expertise is clearly not in being a good human being, your opinion will be just totally discarded. Not buying into somebody who I don't like, because I'm human.
Right.
The one last question.
Practice your testimony in front of your teenagers. They'll be critics for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I was going to ask one last question about attire. Judge Platt, you had offered to present to us in a superhero costume. Do you think superhero costumes are make you more or less likable? Will that help your opinion get across?
My family became aware of that offer, and they wanted to know how to tune in.
And by the way, that's often
and then the word got out to former colleagues and friends, and it got vicious.
But that's the kind of question that's often asked during jury selection, like questions that sound crazy. Mr. Juror number 3, if you were a superhero, what would you be? Because it tells a lot whether you say Spider-Man, underdog, courageous cat, or it tells a lot about what your reference points are. So that's a great question, Janae. And for me, it's Spider-Man, by the way.
And as far as attire goes, you want your testimony to be memorable, not your outfit.
Right. And don't suck up to the judge. So my name is Timothy Sean Driscoll. When I have lawyers come into my courtroom on St. Patrick's, say, Your Honor, I'm wearing a green tie. I'm like, yeah, I'm wearing a blue tie. All right.
That's great. That's great. Well, Michael Kaplan, if you are still on, I had a couple of questions for you as well. Judges, amazing as always, extremely helpful. Appreciate you committing and taking the time to do this every month for us.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
So Michael, are you on and ready?
I am here.
Great. I wanted to ask you from the perspective of an expert, what have you done and what have you seen other experts do to maintain and demonstrate their neutrality?
Okay, before I answer the question, I just have one comment that follows on to our judges' presentations. You understand why I love these guys? I learn so much from them every time they present, and candidly, I find myself being a better witness after having, conferred with and heard the perspectives of our 3 judges. They're just great. So I'm going to segue into what I have to say about other experts. Those experts who I've worked with, and I believe that I fall into this category. Those experts who are the most effective out there and most persuasive are the ones who recognize that all we have to sell is credibility. That's it. We lose our credibility and we've got nothing else. And in order to maintain credibility over the course of one's career, what we have to do is be neutral, be unbiased, be independent. And that's something that often takes working at, because we're dealing with dynamics of the parties on either side of the case. It's going to be a lot easier if we are court appointed, and that facilitates maintaining neutrality. Although I've been in one case where I was a court-appointed expert, there was a court-appointed special master who was an advocate. The special master was advocating for one of the parties and against the other ones, and that created interesting dynamics, topic of a different presentation. In the world of maintaining credibility, I think back to the phrase that our esteemed colleague Zach Myers uses: unimpeachable neutrality. Unimpeachable neutrality. And we do our work. Are we unimpeachably neutral? And how do we do that? And I've heard this from other experts, and it's an approach that I strive to embrace in my matters. Is when you look at a case, ask yourself, what is the guy on the other side going to do? There is an expert that the other side has brought in. How are they going to approach it? What are they going to look at? What are the assumptions that they're going to make? How valid are those assumptions vis-a-vis the assumptions on our side of the case? And be in a position where we have considered how the other expert would approach the case, and is it something that we would embrace or reject? And when we are on the witness stand, or when we are drafting our reports, if there's a report involved in the case, the fact that we have addressed it indicates to the trier of fact that we took a balanced approach to the case. And we need to do this on each and every case. What we need to do is remove the likelihood that someone will challenge us as to having looked at the case from only one perspective and we didn't consider many important perspectives on the case. How do we do that as we work through a case? Part of my protocol when I work with my staff, when I'm preparing a case, I will sit there with my chief lieutenants, with my colleagues, with my partners, and I'll say, what have I missed here? Is there something that I've missed? Is there something that I'm not getting? Tell me. Did we come up with something that's too good or not good enough? Or is there something that's missing in my logic that the first time I'm going to hear about is when opposing counsel cross-examines me? Or if I'm court appointed, when one of the attorneys cross-examines me? I want to deal with all of that in advance because that's critical. It's absolutely critical if you want to be an expert and have a long career. And once you do that, it's also critical that you're a good communicator, that you report, that you communicate well in your written language and in your spoken language, especially when you're on the witness stand, because you've got people in the jury box who are not experts at what we are doing. We are going to, I just want to let you know that we are going to be seeing our judges at the conferences this year. Our judges are going to be back, and we're going to take the presentation to the next level. Last year we looked at why hasn't this case settled yet? And that's one question that all of our judges, each of our judges asks when the attorneys come into the courtroom. Of course, why hasn't it settled? Trial, when you take a case to trial, it's failure to settle. I mean, that's why you're going to trial. What we're going to do is focus on what is it that you could be doing, that we could be doing as experts that will gear us up for resolution rather than gearing up for battle. And I realize that someone who's been in the educational field, in the litigation educational field for forensic experts, is that, yeah, we learn our craft. We learn how to value a business. We learn how to value damages. We learn how to value intellectual property. We learn how to value covenants not compete. We learn how to allocate personal goodwill from enterprise goodwill. And then the next thing we learn after we've done all of that is, let's gear up for trial, gear up for deposition, gear up for battle, and we're going to take on the other side. How about gearing up for a settlement conference, gearing up for a mediation, gearing up to consult with your retaining counsel, or in a settlement environment, enable the parties to come to a resolution that they participate in, rather than going into the courtroom where there may be a winner take all and loser lose all. And that's one area that I personally believe has been either absent or minimized in the context of education. We're going to be expanding upon it. And so stay tuned. We've got a lot of good things happening, and our judges will be a central part of it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it, Michael. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. As always, your perspective is great, and you've helped so many of us. So I appreciate your willingness to, Michael, to come on and just pour into the rest of us and make the profession better. So I think, do we have a segment break real quick before it's Cheryl and my segment?
No, it's
Nope.
just the two of you.
Just go on. All right.
Yes, right now we have Janae and Cheryl. They're going to be discussing, having a discussion about mediation and doing testimony. So Cheryl, you there?
I am here. Yes.
Perfect. And for everyone else, remember to respond to the polling question. Thank you.
Great. So I don't know if you guys realized you were signing up for the Janae show today, and if you don't like my face,
that's great.
It's the best show on the road.
Sorry.
Don't know anybody who would object. So while you're transitioning slides, just think about which superhero is your favorite. You could be any one. I know what my answer is. I'm just wondering what yours is.
I don't know. Probably Batman. I like all the toys. I don't know.
That answer. I may have to change mine. But that right there is why I love collaborating with you on everything that we collaborate with. So anyway, hi, friend.
Hey. Well, I feel like that last segment was such a good transition into what we're talking about.
It really was.
Yeah, it's come together so well. Cheryl, you and I had a discussion which I think led to this segment and kind of our differences of opinion, or just kind of, like as Kaplan said, what am I missing, or what do you think about that? And you, and sorry if I'm jumping ahead here, but you always mention your intake form and figuring out with the client what their goals are. Can you speak to that some more, and how you use that to answer some of these questions that we're going to be tackling today?
Well, sure. I mean, one of the first questions I ask after saying, hey, how did you get my name? Is, I find out a little bit about the case, and then I find out, well, what, from the client and the attorney separately, what is your goal? Do you want to settle this case, or are you just, balls on, headed to trial? We're never going to settle. We're just going to, and sometimes there's a little bit of an education involved at that point. And if I can't agree with, I'm just going to go to trial and I want my 5 pounds of flesh, that may not be a client that I want. You and I have had that discussion, right? We were talking about that, I think, last week or whatever. But so that's the one thing. The second thing is, tell me about the case. Okay, so I'm hearing and seeing this. Well, I'm going to need you to hear it and see it that way before you can work with me. Well, that may not be a position that I would agree with. And so what the attorney, typically would find out at that point is, I advocate for my opinion. I don't advocate for their client or their client's position, because that's kind of not my job, which I think Michael did a great job talking about, as did the judges. So those are the two key points, otherwise, just things like dates and things that you have to make sure you can hit. But if they're not willing to talk about compromise and they just want to go to trial, is that something that you think is necessary? Or do you think you should first, find out if there's a common ground and they really want to just settle this thing? Make sense?
Absolutely.
What about you, Michael? What do you think? Where are you at?
Michael's off to other things. Meanwhile,
of course he is.
Well, okay. So, trial or mediation, that is the question. Does it always benefit the client? Go ahead. Actually, Michael, all right, you are here. Fabulous.
I am here.
Well,
did I miss anything on that answer, Michael?
Well, typically, early in the process, I find that counsel's client is thinking about battle, that they believe that the jury is going to embrace their side of the case, and they're going to be sympathetic to everything that they put up and all the evidence that they provide, and they don't fully appreciate the weight that the argument on the other side is going to carry. As the process evolves, and after there have been depositions, and after everyone's gone through the discovery process, it's easier for the litigants to recognize that there is another side to the story, and that there is a possibility that the other side can be persuasive, and that the trier of fact may not see it their way. So it's a matter of just getting the litigant to the point where they recognize you can win big, you can lose big. It's much better to be in a situation where you participate in the ultimate resolution than going into battle in the courtroom where you go there, you shoot your arrows into the sky, and you have absolutely no input as to what the outcome is going to be.
And that's a good bit of the discussion that I try to have with my clients earlier rather than later. They tell me how, the other party did this, that, and the other thing. And, they're such a scoundrel. So I guess females can be scoundrels, right? I guess, I don't know. So, they're terrible people and they need to do this, that, and the other thing. Like, well, what's the most important part out of this litigation that you want? Besides a scorched earth resolution 100% in your favor. And then we talk about, if they can get that, what are they willing to give up? And that sounds a little bit like I might be treading into that lane, but I'm really not. What I'm doing is finding out at the outset what's most important to them so that when time comes and I have enough facts, I can help the attorney deal with things like settlement and what they can propose to the other side, whether it be, a four-way meeting or then getting into some form, with ADR involved. So I just try to have that discussion at the outset.
So
Why intimidating? Get him off there.
Michael's great.
I'm afraid of you, Michael.
Why do you think that some courts are mandating attempts to mediate or settle? Do you think this is a commendable but unachievable desire to relieve some of the burdens from the court? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think in part, the courts are sometimes, and I don't want to speak for, especially when we just had 3 really good judges speaking, right? But I think a lot of that has to do with trying to carve out and limit number of issues that actually have to fall in front of the judges, in the court, because coming out of COVID, we had like a year-long backlog in most courts, at least 6 months, maybe a year. Okay. So they want to try and get back on a schedule where people are in front of them more often or quicker. So they want to limit the number of issues. And, there's some stuff that just doesn't, I don't think belongs in a courtroom. For example, I think I told you about the traffic ticket that I once received, 1 ticket. And I'm sitting there in traffic court waiting for my mandatory appearance. And the fella in front of me raises his hand, he says, he's here. And the judge says, well, how do you plead? He's like, well, Your Honor, I'm guilty, but I want you to hear my explanation. And the judge said, well, that's nice. Pay over there in the window outside the door and have a great day. So I think they want to get rid of cases like that where you don't really need to be in court.
Save the explanation.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was like, dude, what? Anyway.
So do you think that it is always better to proceed to trial, or is it always better to attempt mediation, or is there never a one-size-fits-all answer?
I think the answer is yes. My answer anyway. And this is how we actually got here today, because we were batting it around. I don't know if it was your case or my case. It was, should these people be mediating? What's their fact pattern and so forth? And, the best time to mediate is, or to suggest it, is when the parties have a little bit of pliability. If they're going to be flexible, if they're not so hostile that they're just going to be disagreeing with everything that comes out of the other party's mouth, if they distrust them so much that they're going to say, prove it. Well, you may as well prove it in court. Okay. If you're willing to accept less than 100%, then maybe attempt mediation. But if there's too much animosity, I don't think you can do it. Also, too, think about the attorney. Is the attorney someone who just wants to sit you in a corner to play with your numbers and send them a report?
Or an attorney who just, wants to sit you in a corner so you can get your cheerleader outfit on? Yeah.
Okay, not touching that one. But yeah, no, I've had attorneys like that too. Just say, send me your report when you're ready. And then you come to find out that they changed the whole approach to the case, but that's a whole separate discussion. So is the attorney a team player or not? Okay. Is the issue involved a novel issue or not? What's Alan saying there? Trial is a forced settlement. Mediation is voluntary. That's correct, Alan. We agree with that. But the question is, do we think that some cases are better or worse candidates for mediation? I think, Alan, that was where we were going with that.
Yeah. Okay. We talked about benefits, of staying out of court. Right. And one of the biggest benefits can be, or some of the benefits can be that it's less expensive. You get to participate, which that's been said by Michael Kaplan, by the judges. You're getting to participate, and maybe you can apply some flexibility to what your needs are. Maybe you
schedule and the schedule.
Quicker resolution.
Right.
But you have had some experiences where it was not perhaps a less expensive option. So, what was your experience and what did you take away from that? How can you serve your clients better after, some of those experiences?
Well, yeah. So, well, first of all, I don't think there's a situation that will, not be a good candidate for mediation just right out of the box. There's always pieces. You can always whittle down what has to go to trial. But the one case that we were talking about, client spent over $100,000 mediating. Did y'all get that number? There is a comma with 3 digits on both sides, and then went to trial after that. That falls in the category of not enough trust. And, one party not trusting, and the party who's not trusting is the same party who's kind of manipulating facts just a little bit, but you manipulate enough, it adds up. So we have a little bit of that. But the other thing too is, I like mediation because a lot of times, litigation is a personal thing. Okay. And it seems less overwhelming if you can break it up. Now we're going to focus on this, then we're going to focus on that. And sometimes, the client will feel like they're regaining some piece of the control in their life that may have been taken away. And it's not necessarily, a divorce case. It could be a business matter that you're dealing with.
All right, I think Mel's on to tell us time, which is really such a shame because this last question, Cheryl, I know is something that you've discussed with me a lot. And the last question about being our role if we're to take on the role of mediator. That was very interesting that the judges were hitting on, mediators, not necessarily being the experts. All
right. Mel's going to have to wait then. And he loves me, so he's going to. It's just to hammer home what Michael was saying earlier. Our job is to parse out the facts, what I call the financial chaos, to analyze the facts and convey results from doing so. That is our job. Okay. You develop the information, you convey that information. I don't care if the forum is a 4-way settlement meeting, if it's if it's arbitration, if it's mediation, if I'm actually going to court and testifying. I don't care because my job is the same. I'm doing the same thing. So how do we add value? To me, and maybe I'm wrong, by listening to what the client and the attorney have to say about what's most important to them. Whatever settlement that you help craft, make sure that lands in their column.
Great. Thank you, Janae. Thank you, Cheryl. We can continue this discussion for sure. I think we have a polling question up, and we're coming into our final segment of the program today with Randy Kessler, Esquire. He is the partner of, I'm gonna butcher this.
AS Family Law. It's good enough. That's
his family, past chair of the ABA Family Law and Georgia Family Law sector. We're going to be talking about current trends in family law, virtual developments, mediation, arbitration, and more. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Randy. Take it away.
All right. I don't know if I'm supposed to share my screen. I will. I got 100 slides, so y'all could, look at them whenever you want. There's the slide. But so first of all, let's follow up on what we were just talking about, mediation. My answer, the lawyer's point of view, because that was the valuation expert's point of view, my answer is, you could hate me, but whatever the lawyer says, right? I mean, if the lawyer is the one riding the case or running the case, probably what you should do is when you decide whether mediation is worthwhile in your case, confer with the lawyer. I mean, I would be upset if I was telling my client that you needed to go to mediation and the forensic expert was saying, don't go to mediation. But you got to be in lockstep with the lawyers. It's got to be a team. So I know this is not a session on mediation. It's part of what I'm going to talk about. And you'll see, current trends or whatever. That's part of what I'm going to talk about. I think, let's see, here's what COVID's affected. Mediation, not just to settle a case, not just because it's a good thing to do, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it saves money, not just because it's more friendly. Even worst case scenario, there's no way it's going to settle. Well, guess what? Then you learn some of the strengths of your opponent when the mediator comes in and says, you need to offer this. And we say, why? And they say, because, and I wait to hear it. And hopefully they give us their best facts, because people can't help themselves. They don't hold stuff for trial. They say to the mediator, because Mr. Kessler's client's a cheating SOB. And I say, is that the best they got? Because if there's nothing else, then I'm feeling better about trial. Or if there's something they have that's worse, I'm glad to hear it there so I can prepare for it at trial. So mediation, there's so many benefits to mediation. So I just weigh in on the side of mediation's almost always a positive. And the truth of the matter is, in family law, you probably don't have a choice, because from the judge's point of view, and if you ask any of the judges, if they're still around, why do you send cases to mediation? I bet you one of the answers would be, because a lot of the time I don't have to see the case again. And that's a good enough reason for judges to send cases to mediation. So again, I'm not going to get through all my slides, but what's changed, what's going on, obviously COVID impacted, it changed everything. I think it just sort of expedited the natural technological change that was going to happen anyway, allowing virtual appearances. We used to do a lot of research and legal wrangling about, can we allow a telephone deposition or a telephone appearance in court? Now people are there in a second virtually. It's not just because of COVID, it's because the technology was coming and the world was evolving, but that's affected everything. That's the big change, is that virtual is reality and reality is virtual nowadays. Those of you who have minor children know the same thing. They're seeing the whole world through their device. So it's changed us. We do our meetings. I have more of the following meetings by Zoom or by virtual methods than in person. And those things include initial consultations, second consultations, depositions, mediations, arbitrations, hearings, conferences with the court, trials, bench trials. And in Georgia, we actually have jury trials, and we're starting to do those, at least the voir dire, virtually. So that's the big change. Some of the other stuff that I think is evolving, again, I don't know how to get all the way to this slide without getting out of it. Let's go down. Some of the things, and again, I want to talk about mediation. If you settle it by mediation, people are going to get along better. The after effect of mediation is much better than the after effect of litigation to me. When you litigate, you're never going to talk to the person again. And also, I can't help myself, because I watched all the former speakers today, and I know Michael's unbelievable. And when you talk about your duty to the truth, your duty to be honest, your reputation being everything, all you have is credibility. Those of you that are enthralled with the Alex Murdaugh case, he has now reinvented, or he now owns, how to be humble in the witness stand, how to own your mistakes, how to fess up. I mean, if I was a prosecutor, my last question on cross-examination would be, so, because he was caught at these things. So you're okay with embezzlement, you're okay with fraud, you're okay with tax evasion, you're okay with taking money from a paraplegic, but you draw the line at murder, because that's his cross-examination. For those of you that are watching it, he's really owned up to everything, and he's believable, and he almost is likable. So not that you all are Alex Murdaughs or that you are criminal defendants, but when you're testifying, being honest, if you make a mistake, own it, right? We're all human. We've made mistakes. I'm glad someone caught that, because I would have felt bad if I realized I made a mistake after the trial, Judge. So that is a mistake that I own. And there's a first time for everything, right? Have fun with it. But I'll tell you, being the divorce lawyer on the panel, I love working with you guys, and you guys really make my life easier. And I'll never forget, years ago, we had a presenter that talked about how good it is to have you folks in the case, not just because of the value you provide, and the silver platter concept of judge. I can argue about how to divide it, but I'm not arguing about what there is to divide, because my expert, Mel Abraham's already told us, here's what there is. And I trust him, and I'm sure the court trusts him. So thank you for that. But more importantly is, when my clients are talking to you, well, number one, they're not talking to me, which is usually a good thing, right? Because it can be a headache, the stuff we deal with every day. But seriously, When they're talking to you all, they're talking about their future. They're talking about what to do to ensure that they will have a stable, financially secure life, that their expenses will be covered. When they're talking to me, they're talking about what that SOB did and what she did, and how do we get back, and how do we get vengeance, and how do we get 2 pounds of flesh. Sometimes they talk to me about the money, and that's a better sign. But if I can get them focused on what are their needs, how do you divide the assets, what assets are there, they're thinking about their future and not their past. So you guys provide a benefit that you may not have known that you provide, or I'm sure you know it, but it's good for someone in my position to tell you thank you, because that really is valuable. I know you all can put questions in the chat, and if I don't see something, Chanda or somebody tell me if there's a question. All the slides there. What I really want to do in my brief 15 minutes to try to get through 2 hours worth of slides is just to tell you, use me as a resource, use the divorce lawyer in your community that you respect as a resource. We all want to help. We're not in this business for, we see each other. We're in each other's shoes. So it's a very camaraderie type operation. I'm lucky enough, I think, I don't know if Mel mentioned it, but I was chair of the family law section of the American Bar. So I have connections. Happy to get you in touch with some good lawyers in your community if you don't know them. But reach out to them and help us help you. And this is my soap opera, or my soapbox that I like to get on. You all make us look better, right? And we can make you look better. And you can reinforce to the client that we know what we're doing, and vice versa. But more important than that, let lawyers know that you will help their clients and you will help them from the get-go, because I know you want to get in early. I know that you hate when it's a month before trial and we say, all right, we need a business valuation, or we need an accounting of the marital assets, and you're mad at us for not getting you in earlier. And it is our fault. Clients don't know that you even exist, many of them, or they don't know how useful you are, or they don't know how to go about getting one. I had someone today call me and say, do I go out and get a forensic accountant, or is that something my lawyer is supposed to do? Someone was coming to me after being with another lawyer for a year. I said, no, your lawyer should talk to you about it, and your lawyer will help you find somebody. If you know somebody, we'll be glad to talk to them, but we know who we like. But let them know that if we can get you in earlier, and also for those lawyers that don't want to hire you all because it's money that they're not going to make, shame on them, number one. But number two, let them know you're not taking their money. You're doing stuff that's going to make them look better and make their results better. And I love getting you in early on. And I think I mentioned in December, back when we were in Florida, something that I've started doing that you might want to offer up to some of your lawyer friends. And this is the kernel. If you take nothing away from my few minutes today, take this away. Offer to join as early as the initial consultation. Now, I know when I get a new client set up to meet with me, I don't know if they have millions of dollars or if they're just fighting about custody and they have no money to divide and they weren't even married. But once I start meeting with them, 9 times out of 10 now, where I am in my practice, I need a forensic. I need somebody. I need a business valuation expert. If that's likely to happen, and if you can get around the lawyers that you know have the significant complex cases that need forensic valuation experts, then let them know that they can call you on a moment's notice, and if you might just jump in by phone or by Zoom just to say hi. Can I tell you the relief that provides a lot of my clients when I say not only can we hire this person known as a forensic evaluator or a business valuation expert, let me actually introduce you to, Michael Kaplan or whoever it may be, and I get them on the Zoom or the phone, and you all have your elevator pitch, right? Your elevator speech that, look, we're here to support Randy. He's a good lawyer, but he's not an accountant. He's not trained in what we do. We will do our job. We will give him the numbers and the information and give it to you. And we're here to talk about things, and we will talk to the owners of the company and the managers and the supervisors, and we'll have a good idea of what it's worth. And then I turn around and say, and you know what the good thing is? They get to testify, right? I don't get to testify. I can't tell the judge under oath what your business is worth or what your spouse's business is worth. You can say it, but you've got a bias, Mr. Client, Miss Client. Valuation expert, if they're good, their duty is to the truth, and the judge respects them, and the judge is going to say, thank you for giving me the neutral opinion or the honest opinion or whatever it is. Now tell me why, Mr. Kessler, your client should get more than half of that or less than half of that. So get in as early as you can. Tell the lawyers, it's not that you want to make the money. It's not that you're doing it for that reason. You're doing it to make the transition easier. You're doing it to make the client like the lawyer more, right? Clients, seem to really enjoy it. They appreciate it. They appreciate hearing about you all. They really appreciate meeting you all. And I've started doing it a few times. Somebody in the chat said, it's a forced settlement versus an agreed upon settlement. The way I describe it to clients is sort of very similarly. You want to take $4,000 a month? No, how about $4,200 a month? Okay, and you agree. Or trial, the judge comes out and says, you want to take $4,000 a month? You say, I guess I have to, right? Yes, that's right. That's the difference, and they should be in control. The only other thing I'll say about mediation, Zoom or virtual or in person, it's still the same, which is my goal in mediation, of course, is to settle a case if I can get it settled. But my real goal is to get the clients to buy into that process and to realize life is a negotiation. And when you have an ex-spouse, it's more of a negotiation. And there are one of two ways to do it. You can hire me and you can go to court and you can fight and you can get a result you love or you don't love, and you can appeal it, or you can figure out how to negotiate with your soon-to-be ex and do it in a respectful way that's more productive, more efficient, more cost-effective. Mediation is that way. And then my final words, because I know I'm probably at the limit of my time, is that meet-arb is becoming a big thing now. It's probably not the right thing where you mediate with somebody and then you turn that person into the arbitrator, but I can't tell you how many times clients will tell me, I just spilled my guts to this woman and I told her everything about my life and I just want her to decide. I don't want to go back and have to do it all before a judge 6 months from now. Can we just let that person decide? So it's happening, and it puts we have to put some brakes on the process, because I don't want my client saying, if I had to, I'd walk away with nothing just to get away from her. And then you're going to turn around and let the mediator who heard that arbitrate your case, knowing that you'd be okay walking away with nothing. That there's a balance there, but keep that in mind. Love helping you guys. Happy to talk to anybody offline. You got my email, you got my info. You can Google me to find me, Randy Kessler. But I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to yield the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randy. I mean, we could all the slides and people have said it looks like a really, really meaty presentation. So we'd love to see that whole presentation at some point. So thank you for being here.
I'll be back.
And always good information with us. So, and for the rest of you, thank you for being here and staying with us for the 2 hours we are together. We will be back here again for another AVW, March 20th, 2023, same time. So make sure that you're on the list, and we'll see you in March. All right. The rest have an incredible day and the beginning of March. We'll see you at the end of March.